Hi, everybody. Today we have class asynchronously because we are observing the May 4th observance commemoration today. So this recording is something that you should be watching in perusal. And this is the first time we've had you annotate a video in perusal, but I think it'll be a nice experience and an opportunity for you to practice or to listen and ask me questions, as well as adding your own thoughts to the topics and hopefully enhancing your learning of this information. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share with you the review PowerPoint for the final exam. And this will be available, the PowerPoint will be available in your learning materials folder for today's class. So just in terms of the exam format, allow me to clarify, and I apologize for the confusion. Because the study guide was sort of uploaded from last year, I should have done some editing to that because it had some old information. So just so that you know, some of the things that are the same as what the study guide says is that the exam will be multiple choice. There will be some true, false, some atypical, typical types of questions, which I'll get into in a moment. Some matching, looking at sentence types. And the final exam will consist of 52 questions worth 112 points. And I will take the final score out of 100 points. That means you can miss a few questions and still earn 100% on the final. If you did get all 112 points, the maximum grade you can get is still 100. So actually, I think we'll just let you earn that as extra credit now that I think of it. We'll just let that be extra credit. I just changed my mind. All right, so the correction from the study guide, something that's different, is the exam will only be available on May 12th from 12:45 to 3 p.m. And just so to clarify that, May 12th is Wednesday. I believe that's correct. So next Wednesday. And so make sure if you're a person, you've gotten permission from me that you're not attending live synchronous classes, that you've given me the time that will work better for you to take the exam for that. So I have decided to stick with what's on the study guide and make this exam open book and open notes. And that means you can use your text and notes on the computer or otherwise. Proctorio permissions will allow for this. I do ask that you not consult with one another on it. I do want it to be your independent knowledge and ability to access materials. One thing that I would recommend as you're preparing, I would not recommend that you just not try to recall information because you know you'll have access, because you do still have a limited amount of time. You'll have 2.5 hours. Typically, final exam time frame is 2 hours and 15 minutes, but I'm giving you a little bit of a cushion there in case there are any technical issues. So you will need to prepare for this exam. The way I would recommend that you approach it is prepare as if you're not going to have open notes, but then you'll have your notes in your book accessible if you need it. So that may just help you calm down, but I would prepare as if you won't have your books and notes. And then during the exam, you may have access to your book and notes. I understand that those things are on your computer many of the time, and that is okay. Proctorio permissions will allow for you to do this. So just please keep that in mind. If you do have questions once you're in the exam, you may ask me about the content, but not, is the answer this, for example. And you can send the email from a webmail tab in your internet browser. So when you start with Proctorio, it will have you close out everything except your screen. It will automatically close that out, but you can open up a new webmail tab and email me, and it will see that you're emailing me, and that is fine. So you can email me a question if you need some clarification on a question. You may do that. Another question or correction from the study guide. The study guide said there would be a discussion board forum. We are not going to have the discussion board forum. So I don't want you to communicate with other students during the exam. You may absolutely prepare for the exam together. I encourage collaboration, but during the exam, I do want it to be just your work. The covered content for the exam, it's essentially a second half exam for the most part. Here are the chapters that are covered. And then in terms of concepts from before the midterm, I would like you to be able to apply your knowledge of the 5 aspects of language. What are those? So take a moment, you can annotate here, what are those 5 aspects of language? And then I would recommend that you don't just base your studying on looking at this lecture. I would recommend that you go back to those study guides for each chapter. Those are posted in Blackboard. See if you can recall the information asked about in the study guides. See if you can recall that information, because you'll want to have this knowledge fairly accessible to you in your profession. I agree with you that you're going to be able to look things up a lot in your career. You can think of your career as being open book, but just like I'm recommending, it's going to be very time consuming if you have to look everything up along the way. If you can come in with knowledge, you're going to be much stronger in your profession. So one thing, you'll get some typical, atypical questions. You've had quiz questions like this where you were asked to say, this is a kindergartner and this particular language behavior, is this typical or atypical for the kindergartner? Same for an adolescent. I think we have like a young high school or something like that for these questions. So this is where you want to be knowledgeable about what language skills, speech and language skills would be expected for these ages. On the topic of this, remember this was right at the cusp. We decided not to cover this on the midterm. So there's language development for ages 3 to 5. So this is the first chapter post-midterm that we covered, that we had a quiz on. And so this is covered in this final exam. So one of the things I did was I went back to your quizzes related to these chapters. And I just tried to look at what were some topics that tended to be a little bit more challenging for all of you, for most of you. And I listed them here. So I'm going to provide some of this information, but the purpose of this lecture is not to replace all of the instruction and lecture that we have had in prior classes. Remember that all of those are accessible in recordings in Microsoft Stream. Remember that you have all the lecture slides. So please reference those if you would like to understand more fully. But I'm hoping too, with your annotations, that you're going to be able to look at those resources or your text and be able to add some answers to what these questions are in your annotations in Perusall. So first of all, with language development between ages 3 and 5, one thing that we're seeing develop is the ability to use story grammar. So what is story grammar? Anybody want to put that in your annotations? What is story grammar? So part of what story grammar is, it's not using grammatical patterns. It's more looking at what is the key structure of a story. You introduce your characters, you talk about where they are, the setting, what is the problem, what is the solutions, any feelings that surround the story. These are elements of story grammar. And so when you're working with children on language, you may actually, either writing or telling stories, you may actually even create rubrics or use rubrics for stories. Did your story introduce the characters? Did they use these elements of story grammar? So another thing, and I mentioned this before, is knowing the 5 elements of language. And remember, they are categorized. This goes back to the very beginning of the semester. Form, content, and use. And hopefully you've had lots of practice by now with our hands-on projects about what form, content, and use. So form is your structure, phonology, the sound structure, syntax, grammatical structure, and morphology, which is also part of grammatical structure. Content, meaning semantics, meaning what words mean, definitions of words, and use, or pragmatics. So be able to identify what these are across all stages we studied this semester. For example, figurative language requires knowledge in what? What is the area of language that figurative language is part of? What about topic maintenance? What is topic maintenance in those 5 elements of language? What element of language is it? Another question for this area is, what is decontextualized language? That's a sure long word. So what is that? And so when we talk about context, that's our environment. And when we're talking about things in our environment, it's super easy. We can say, look at this pen. This pen is a clicker pen, and it writes with nice black ink. I'm talking about this item in my context. But if I were to talk to you about a pen that is outside my context, that isn't in the present environment, and let's say I want to describe, I have a pen and it doesn't have a lid and it has glitter in it, and when I write with it, glitter comes out. That I don't have that glitter pen in my context. So that would be decontextualized language. And that requires a higher level of cognition in the speaker to be able to think and talk about things that are absent from the current context. And this is something that these children are gaining during ages 3 to 5. What is print awareness? What is print awareness? How does that relate to phonological awareness? So knowing those things is important. These are things that you're going to be looking at in your students to see if they have these building blocks that are important for pre-literacy and getting them ready to learn to read and continuing to develop their literacy skills. Speech sounds are still often an error between the ages of 3 and 5, typically in normally developing children. So it'd be important for you to know, what are the sounds that are more problematic for children who are 3 to 5, who are in this preschool age? Being aware of that, and then we'll talk about